This episode brought to you by Nomadic Research, built for the wild and forged in adversity. Somewhere between the front lines and the firelight, a vision was born. The founders of Nomadic Research spent years in the harshest environments on Earth, where grit and resilience weren't just words, but a way of life. They saw a need for gear that could handle anything, gear that wasn't just built, but built to last. From battlefields to backcountry trails, every piece of Nomadic Research gear is designed with one mission: unyielding performance for those who refuse to quit. The founders believe in patriotism, personal responsibility, and the freedom of the great outdoors, because adventure isn't just a weekend escape, it's a way of life. Born in the heart of Afghanistan, forged in adversity, and built for the wild, Nomadic Research is gear for those who go further. You can start your adventure at nomadicresearch.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD podcast, Dynamic Tales Delivered. This week in the studio, picture this: your childhood heroes replaced by bullies, neglect, and violence, only to escape into elite combat and face even deeper internal battles. This week's guest rose from a brutal upbringing to the ranks of Delta Force, confronting threats overseas and demons within. His story dives deep into self-destruction, toxic relationships, drug use, and the ultimate fight to reclaim his life. He's raw, he's honest, and it's a very powerful story. Please welcome into the studio, Tyler Gray. What's going on, my friend?
Not too much, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we got so much to talk about. This book is absolutely amazing. And I cannot wait for it to hit the shelves and people to get a part of this, because, of all the biographies I've read, yours is one of the most raw. Just put yourself out there in front of everyone, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of bad and indifferent is is in this book. I really, really, really wanted to. I had been, or have been, I guess. It's crazy. We're 6 weeks, actually 6 weeks, by the way, to the day for the release. And it's just crazy. I've been working on it for 15 years, more and less at different points, obviously. But the one thing that I wanted to do was I just wanted to write something that was just, I wanted to write something that people could read and see a reflection of themselves. And what I've realized over time is the one thing: if you want people to tune out and stop listening, tell them how strong you are. Tell them how great you are. Tell them all the great stuff you've done. If you want people to listen, and I mean really listen, tell them what you've struggled with. Tell them about your failures. Tell them about your the worst experiences in your life, because we all experience struggle, and everyone can identify equally with struggle from each other. So I really wanted the book to focus on, I didn't want it to be heroizing, or I really wanted it to be me, who I really was, not what I wanted people to think I was.
Well, it's interesting that you say, though, you didn't want it to heroize, but watching your story and the stuff that you did and the ranks that you went up through, it's hard not to heroize it. I think that's a strong measure in your corner, that you made it to where it was so raw that it really didn't heroize it. But if you look at it as a whole from the outside, it's definitely a hero story.
I know exactly what you're saying, and that, I guess, technically is the irony of the book. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hadn't read it, but what you just said technically is why the ending of the book is exactly what it is. That was the realization at the end. But the biggest thing for me is that, it's so, you're right. It ultimately, if I'm a professional storyteller, at least in the stuff I do in the entertainment industry, and every hero's journey is, a person, everything's going a certain way. Something comes in, some difficult thing that they have to conquer. And the story is them trying something, it fails, they try something else, it fails, they try something else, it fails, and then by the end of the film or the book, whatever, they've eventually conquered it. So yeah, it is a classic hero's journey tale, yet at the same time, one of the big things I also want to make clear about the book is, I don't want people to take away the assumption that, you know, I don't still struggle with certain things. I don't still make mistakes. You know what I mean? The thing that I've learned about healing, recovery, whatever you want to call it, is it's pretty much, to a degree, growth even is a journey for the rest of your life. You'll stop growing the day you die. That's when you've stopped growing. And so for me, what the book is about is the struggle, to value and love myself ultimately, which that's what I've gotten to, but there's still a million things that, I work on daily.
So let me ask you in movie terms then, do you think you're in the third act of your life?
Ooh, great question. Realistically, probably no. I think that I think that because I'm at the furthest I've gone in my life. But I guarantee if you ask me that 20 years from now, I'd look back at right now and go, oh man, I thought I was in the third, but really I was in the second. You know what I mean? So so technically I want to say yes, but realistically I got to say probably not realistically. And the book for me was, I'll tell you a story about it, because this I think is really, this surprised me. So I mean, you read the book. When I'm talking about anything in the book, when I was, telling the story and working with Lauren, and, we were talking about all this stuff, I would tell the story about the worst day of my life, no different than I'm talking to you right now. I would tell you anything, it's this happened, when I got blown up, when there's stories from my childhood. And people hear me tell that and go, oh man, he's really, it doesn't affect him, or he's over it, or whatever. And the reality that's taken me time to realize is that it's really not healthy that I can talk about those negative things in my life with no connection. That's not a good thing. And so one of the things that I've really worked on is trying to feel again, to connect to my past, my experiences, the difficult times, rather than disconnect from it. And what's crazy about the book was I told all the stories, and then when I'm going through and editing the book, I'm reading these stories now. Obviously, I know what happens. It's my life. I know what happens. But
I
now
hope so.
now I'm reading a story from my childhood, and in a weird way, it feels like it's someone else when I'm reading it, because it's not me now telling it. There's a level of disconnection because I'm reading it. So it's like I'm reading someone else's story. And when I read the book, I had a lot more emotional connection to a lot of the experiences in my life in ways that I had never had before, because there was a level of disconnection. You know what I mean? It felt like it was someone else's story, and so I was able to connect to it rather than the disconnection that I feel to my own story, if that makes sense. Which I didn't
it
expect.
does. And you wrote it very viscerally. I mean, like, you can really feel what you're talking about with the way that you wrote it. And you bring up the childhood. Let's talk about that. I mean, Bakersfield, California.
Yeah, good old
Is it
Baco.
is it the biggest shithole on the planet?
I mean, there are definitely bigger ones. There's no doubt about it. But Bakersfield it's an interesting place. It was also, when I grew up, it was different than it is now. But it was a weird place, still is, but it's weird in the sense that back then it was part farm town. Very much a farming. Around it are all farms, Central California, Southern Central California, I guess, for lack of a better term. But then at the same time, it had these massive, really bad, really tough, rough areas, kind of in the city. So it was very, there was a huge contrast. A lot of people don't know the band Korn. Korn's from Bakersfield. Them and Buck Owens are the two biggest things to ever come out of Bakersfield. But
Well, now you too.
yeah, no. But it's so. Anyways, it was a very interesting place to grow up. I grew up, pretty much in the city, as much of a city as Bakersfield is, but pretty much about probably half a mile from what you would call the center, City Hall, city of the center of the city, and yeah, it was an interesting place to grow up. I wished at the time that I always wanted to be somewhere else, if that makes sense. I never felt like I belonged there. And I think that's a common thing for a lot of people that had the same experiences that I did growing up, is they just don't feel like they belong where they are, whether that's the city they're living in, the school they're going to, the group they're in with, the neighborhood. It's almost like an imposter syndrome from birth to a degree is how I explain it.
Well, the reason I asked you that question was not to be rude about it, but it seemed like throughout the book, when you even talk about combat zones and you compare Bakersfield to the combat zones, you pick up a real disdain for the city coming through you. And, and how you just talked about whether you're in the group or where you live or the city or the country, you kind of ran the entire bucket of that. It was everything. It was the school. It was your brother. It was your father. It was the bullies in the neighborhood. Like, there wasn't a break anywhere. So I think the way we started is with your father, because I think that's where a lot of this began.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I would go as far to say, that I'm going to go on a limb and say, the vast majority of people I think that I've met in the military or first responders, at least men generally, there's some kind of strained relationship with their father. I know mine was, and that seems to be a common theme for reasons I obviously talk about in the book. But yeah, it was. I mean, I absolutely hated my father for a a huge part of my life, a huge part of my life. And, you know, I, I remember being, very young, and I didn't drink beer. I could probably count on one hand the beers that I've had in my entire life. And the reason, I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but the reason was my dad drank beer, daily. And so when he drank beer, he was different. And so I associated beer as being evil. And so I never drank it, my whole life. Um, and, I had a lot of resentment for many years because of his alcoholism. And quite frankly, one day, which is not that long ago, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, I just finally accepted that he wasn't going to stop drinking. And I just finally accepted that and said, I kind of tried to let go of that resentment and just go, you know what, I don't have that many years left with him. And, I'll just have a relationship with him. I'll just accept him the way he is rather than trying to make him what I've always wanted him to be. And that really helped our relationship, really created it, quite frankly.
So you don't hate him anymore.
No, I don't hate him. I mean, my dad's an interesting guy. I mean, he's, I just because he drank so much for so long, I never, I mean, I'm not exaggerating here. I mean, my dad I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but my dad in 2003 was drinking and driving, shockingly, I know. And he got into a head-on collision with an RV, broke his neck, his back. And I mean, it's the only reason drunk people hit an RV head on and they're so relaxed, they break their neck and their back, but they don't die. Right. And what was crazy, that was 2003. I remember visiting him in the hospital. He had a halo on. He looked ridiculous, quite frankly. And in the hospital, my dad's making jokes, and I consider myself a funny guy. I'm pretty humorous. I love, try and make people laugh, etc. And to be perfectly honest, for years and years and years, I was like, I don't know where it came from. You know what I mean? My dad sure as hell ain't funny. My mom's not funny. And I'm in the hospital and my dad's making jokes. And I remember standing there and like watching it. And I was like, who freaking, what aliens came down here and switched bodies with my father, because this is not him. And I realized that it was very possibly the first time I'd seen him like stone cold sober, not drinking. And then for the first time, I kind of saw his personality, his real personality, and it shocked me quite honestly.
Well, you do mention about him drinking beer. As a matter of fact, you talk about the pile of cans by his chair and the blue light of the TV on, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
mention it a lot
yeah.
that happened with your mom and your brother. It kind of seems, and you and I have talked about this, that you were just kind of left out of the picture. You were kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, yes, but I want to be clear that wasn't it wasn't intentional. Obviously, I didn't know then what I know now. It wasn't intentional. It was just my brother, as I mentioned in the book, had every health issue you can, from severe asthma. He was literally allergic to everything, couldn't eat. I mean, it was just, speech therapy, you name, ADHD, ADD, you name it, he had it. And he was just, quite frankly, kind of a maniac. I mean, he would just wake up screaming at the top of his lungs and didn't want to go to school. So for me, I just really tried to be perfect, for lack of a better term, and not be a problem because he was such a problem. And again, that's not his fault. I'm not blaming him in any way. But so I just tried to hide my needs and not be a problem and not ask for anything. And of course, that definitely helped my mom, who was really dealing with this more than anyone. And I didn't know, the effect that it was having on me, which was that I felt like I was, kind of being forgotten. I was just trying to help, but the unknown effect that it was having on me was, I definitely felt like I was not important and not valued, which is one of the things that I talk obviously in the book quite often about lack of self-worth and lack of self-love. And I think that is in my opinion, the core issue in the veteran community that or first responder community that no one's talked about, is a fundamental lack of self-worth.
Do you think though that trait right there, where you just kind of tried to keep to yourself, not be a problem, if I can turn it on its head and say, don't you think that helped you be as good a soldier as you were?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think I'll go a step further and say this. The the book's called Forged in Chaos. That chaotic childhood creates someone who is good at a job that operates in chaos. Like, that's what it does. So yes, absolutely, my childhood directly helped me be a better soldier. And I would argue what the book is about is that that's good and that's a superpower. The problem is when you get out, those same qualities from childhood that made you a super soldier basically are a superhero in the eyes of others, actually end up making you a supervillain in your own life after you're out, because those qualities are no longer important, valued, or quite frankly, generally positive when you're out and trying to adjust to a life outside of chaos.
So let me ask you then, you said you hated your father. Who do
Yeah,
you think you hated more growing up, your father or yourself?
it's a great question. I'm going to answer it by saying both,
Okay.
because because I was hyper aware at that time that I was just like him. So I think I hated my father because I saw so much of me in him. So does that make sense? You know,
It,
like I hated my father because I felt like we were the same, and I already hated myself. So I think it was a little bit of both.
yeah, I think that it came from a lot of different things. You know, we can talk about your teacher at school was really the first time that you felt kind of put on the spot in front of people, I guess you would say.
Yeah, she was the worst. Yeah,
I
the
think,
absolute worst. Yeah.
yeah. So when you look at her and you look at her, you know, telling you you're stupid in class and in front of people and putting you out on Front Street in front of everybody, with her though, do you think that when she did those kind of things that it came from a mean place? You see what I'm saying? Like, do you think that that was her trying to teach? Because you know, when we went to school back in the day, it was a little different than it is now. They weren't so in touch with their emotions and stuff. But or do you think that that came from a mean place with her?
Um, you know, it's hard for me to say because you know this is second grade me
Right.
that's my only perception. But from what I remember, she was she felt like she was a million years old. I have no idea how old she actually was. I'm assuming, you know, maybe there's no way she was in her 40s. But again, 40 was much older back in 80, 5 or whatever it was. But she was older. That's a better way to say it. She was older than every other teacher I think I've ever had. So from what I remember, she was just a mean old woman. She was like a witch. Um, that being said, as you said, it was different back then. I think
Right.
she was just, or I don't think, I know she was a handwriting, Nazi. Like truly, that's all she cared about in a freakish way. And so I think she was just a bad teacher. I don't know how else to say it. Um, but I can say that I was definitely um, singled out. She just really had it out for me, which had I been, allowed, kind of, asshole, okay, that would have been understandable, which is totally understandable. The teachers that treated me that way, like when I was in high school, I get it, it was a teacher, Mr. Holland. I get it. He told me he was going to kill me one day. But back then, I was such a good, quiet kid that just wasn't good at cursive handwriting, which, by the way, they don't even freaking teach anymore. um, and so, yeah, it was odd to me. The biggest thing, though, that really the real critical part in hindsight was not having that self assuredness and that confidence and that value and that self love. It was only in rehab, as I say in the book, that I realized I go out of my way to try and prove that I'm not stupid. And then when I really was CSIing it, and going through my past and trying to figure it out, it all came from that. It all came from that being called stupid repeatedly by her in the second grade, and that led me to a lifetime of trying to prove to others that I wasn't stupid. And it's unbelievable to me how many things that happen in childhood basically cement in certain behaviors that we subconsciously, unknowingly continue to do for the rest of our lives, because of, quite frankly, something that was never true to begin with.
Yeah. I know myself, I keep a lot of people at bay because of childhood, you know, where you don't ever fully trust someone. Now, of course, that goes into the jobs that you have and stuff like that, where you don't trust. But I 100% agree with you that childhood cements so many things that it's crazy how you think about it now. When you look back, like let's say a reunion and stuff, and you think about going and seeing all those people again, does it bring up anxiety for you?
No, I actually never went to a single reunion. I don't talk to anyone that I grew up with. Actually, that's not true. I talked to one person, rarely, but one girl that I grew up with, actually, we dated in high school. She's the only person I casually talk to still. Other than that, I've never, I don't know. I never seriously considered it. It just, to me, to go to a reunion, like a high school reunion or whatever, to me, it just felt like I don't care what those people think, and not negatively or positively. I just truly, their opinion of me doesn't, I don't need to prove them wrong or whatever. If I went and saw a bully that, picked on me, I wouldn't get anything or maybe I think I wouldn't, I don't know, but it never appealed to me. So I never went to any of the reunions, and I generally haven't been back to Bakersfield other than, I go to my mom's for Easter once every, 2 years. And I do not stay the night. I go and I leave. It's a quick trip.
Well, I want to talk about one other thing from your childhood until we get into your actual career. And I want to talk about your imaginary friends. And I want to talk about your imaginary friends because, like you and I, when we talked on the phone, I said that I think that those two imaginary friends really helped you in your assessment and selections and stuff by having that, by being able to rely on yourself with these imaginary friends. I think that it helped you out immensely later on in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I credit my and this, I think, is directly related to my imaginary friends, whose name I'll leave in the book so people can get the context of it. But I'm pretty sure I was frequently alone. I was frequently, I would leave the house and just, walk around or go sit somewhere. And I credit that extended time alone for my imagination, because I would always try and go imagine me being on an adventure, me, doing something much more fun and interesting and exciting than I was currently doing. And so, I spent quite a lot of time doing fake adventures with, my two imaginary friends. And I definitely think that helped my imagination, which would contribute to the stuff I have done and do in the entertainment industry. But yeah, also probably, there's definitely times in the military where, it helped me to be able to escape outside of myself and kind of feel like I was supported maybe when I wasn't. And so again, imaginary friends for kids is a coping mechanism, and it definitely helped for sure.
I'm just trying to figure out, whenever you join the military, I mean, you go for it and you go to the highest levels that you can. And what's such a disconnect for me is when we talk so much about your past and how you hated yourself and low self-esteem and trying to prove that you were smart and all of these things, how you became who you became in the military.
So I'm glad you asked that, because I am very aware of the contradiction. And I had to spend quite a lot of time really digging it all up and trying to understand it logically. So what I realized was that, as a child, yes, I didn't value myself. I didn't love myself, all those things we've already talked about. But what I realized was, when it came to the military, that, when I was a kid, pretty much, if I could, every single day I was, playing guns. If I could get anyone to play with me, we called it playing guns. Some kids called it playing war, whatever. And I always had confidence in that side of me, if that makes sense. I never doubted myself when it came to anything in the military. It just, that was the one area that I knew I could do, if that makes sense. So it's like I had so much or so little confidence in so many things, but that was the one area where I didn't doubt myself. And that is how I was able to do what I did was because of that. So it's also interesting and worth noting that you can have little parts of yourself that for whatever reason, I think it's just because I wanted to do it for so long, that I was so passionate about being in the military and special operations, that passion translated to motivation, and that motivation translated into confidence.
Was it hard for you?
Some things were hard and some things weren't. The thing that I like to tell people about the military, and I don't care where you go in the military, you can go the most elite unit or anywhere. Everything comes down to motivation. The difficulty is directly related to the level of motivation you have to do it. With enough motivation, I could get up here, stand up and walk to Georgia. With not enough motivation, I couldn't get up to take a piss, right? So for me, the level of motivation that I had made it not as hard as maybe someone who wasn't as motivated, as that makes sense. But the biggest deal with the military that I feel is the structure is laid out. The path to get anywhere in the military, there is a task, condition, and standard. If you want to apply for this selection course, you got to do these things, right? The requirements to the PT test is these numbers. You know what I mean? There is what the standard is. Right?
Everything's finite.
Exactly. And okay, yeah, I went through a selection course that you don't know what the standard is, but I knew what the standard is. And I can tell everyone what the standard is for anything you do in the military. I can tell you right now, it's 100% of your effort. That's the standard. What the numbers are if someone does 25 push-ups and that is 100% of their effort, and somebody else does 50, but that's 80% of that effort, to me, the person that did 25 with 100% effort is the better person. That's the person who gives it their all. What the numbers, end up being, the reps or whatever, or the time, that isn't as important as the effort. So the military lays out the structure, and then you're required to do the effort. But for me, again, drawing on motivation, the effort wasn't that difficult. And the reason I'm saying all this is because now, once you get out, what I experienced when I get out, and what I think a lot of people experience when they get out, is now there is no standard. There is no path. There is no laid out structure in how to get where you want to go. So you can't just focus on the effort of doing. You have to realize that you have to put together the entire plan and figure out all the steps, and then put in the effort. And I think that's where a lot of veterans and first responders struggle, is the loss of that structure.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. The structure, not only the structure of it, but having that purpose every day. You're gonna go do this. And I'm not by any means, poo-pooing on other jobs or anything, but when you have military first responder, especially in the military, when you're in combat zones and everything, you have a purpose every day, and you know what that purpose is when you get up and when you go to bed at night. And I know that in my kind of jobs, I need that. I know that about myself, that I need that kind of, where this is what you do. This is, yes, there may be additional things that add on, but this is what you do.
So my argument that I'm making now is that I think, and I agree with everything you said, I think that purpose that you get from those jobs, for people who are struggling with valuing themselves and they're searching for external value, that purpose gives them the ability to have value. My purpose, the purpose of me doing that, gives me value, right? So purpose and value are intrinsically tied. And so conversely, when you lose that daily purpose, like you're talking about, you also can lose that value in yourself. because it's tied to that purpose. And the purpose was tied to the job.
How did you feel about awards and decorations in the military?
Didn't care about them at all.
But see, once again, that is that's such a it's such a contradiction to me that you're looking for self-worth, and there's a physical thing that you can use to show. When you're a ranger, you wear the tab. When you work at the unit, there's nothing that really shows out there, but there are ways to physically verify that you have worth. And so when you say, I don't care about that kind of stuff, I get contradicted again.
No, and you're right, and I'm aware of that, and I shouldn't say I didn't care at all. I mean, in my earlier years, I think I cared. When I first got a CIB, I was like, oh wow, that's, but also it was a little bit different, to be honest, at that time, because like the only people with CIBs were like, Panama or Somalia vets. So like, when I got a CIB, they were so rare, prior to 9/11. So that meant something to me. But I think just the further I went in the military, the less I cared about awards, ribbons, and decorations. And I mean, to be honest, now, I mean, if you put a gun to my head and asked me where my, medals were, maybe in a garage, in a storage, I honestly don't know, because they just don't, they stopped meaning something. That being said, I 100% agree with you that, you talk about a bunch of people searching for value, and now you have a system where you literally wear your value on your chest. That's addictive to people searching for value. And again, to be honest, I don't think the military is unaware of that. I think they know exactly how the system works, why the system's designed that way. And I think they're very aware with, again, I mean, look at the amount of times that the military has arbitrarily created an award, to make people feel like,
your basic training award that you get on your uniform.
Yeah, the thing, we called it the "Thanks for Coming" ribbon, right? But like there's been multiple, and I'm not saying certain services don't deserve the combat badges they've gotten. A lot of them do, but there's been many awards that are kind of like, really, like you're doing an award for that, or look at something like, when Shinseki, I was in when this happened, when Shinseki, took the black beret from the Rangers and gave it to the whole army, like. That was something where they were trying to aid recruiting and aid the perception of value among the entire military. And again, they know exactly what they're doing. They know why they're doing it. And I think it's it's knowing what I know now. I look at all the mechanisms very differently than I did when I was in or before I was in. And I think that's common to just any people that are a person that was in the military and then they get out after a certain amount of years, you start seeing things just differently, than you did before.
You talk about, though, proving to everyone how smart you are. When you wear that Tower of Power on your BDUs every day and show people, these are all the things I can do.
Yeah, I didn't have a Tower of Power. I didn't have a Special Forces tab because I didn't go through the Q course. So I had a small tower. I had a house. I had a 2-story house, whatever you call it. But yeah, I mean,
I'm more focused on the chest than the sleeve.
Oh, the chest. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Look, Halo wings are cool. Yeah, it was cool. Well, luckily too, when you're over there, you don't wear a uniform that has your stuff very often. The only time I can think of that I wore a uniform with patches was when I went to BNOC. That's I think the only time I can think of. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a strange feeling. But here's the critical thing that I want to make very clear. I've worked with, and I'm not going to obviously say who it is, but I worked with a very, very, very famous actor, one of the most famous actors in the world, and super famous, super rich, super good looking, just, everyone looks at him and goes, oh, I wish I was that guy. And I spent a decent amount of time with him. And I realized that, him and I had the same self-worth issues, unresolved self-worth issues. And what I realized is the fame, the money, all that stuff, and the skill in acting or whatever you want to call it, it didn't overcome his childhood feeling of lack of worth. So the reason I'm saying that is it's the same thing for me. The stuff I did in the military, the stuff I did in Hollywood, none of that changed the way I felt about myself at all. Yeah, did I accomplish this? Did I do that? Yeah, but it didn't change the way I valued myself. And the reason it can't is because you can't value yourself truly for what you've done. You have to value yourself for who you intrinsically are. And until I put that together, nothing I did, no amount of money I made, jobs I got, it didn't change how I felt about myself. And I was, because of that, obviously doing all the crazy shit I do in the book because I was miserable.
In the military, do you think you were miserable at all in the military?
I think it was, in my opinion, there was something there, if that makes sense. There was something there. I hadn't the character I created was still intact when I was in the military. So I was aware that there was something there. There was a fundamental. I was aware subconsciously that I was basically portraying a character. I was subconsciously aware of it, but I wasn't consciously aware of it. So I wouldn't say that I truly was miserable when I was in, just because the facade hadn't cracked yet. But I was subtly, if I really, in quiet moments, I think I was subtly aware that something wasn't right.
Because that character that you're talking about, you pretty much made that guy up in high school.
Yeah, right before high school started. Yeah,
right, yeah. And I felt like the only time in the book where that misery and that self-hate was when you're talking about the military. I feel like that was the only time that it went away in the book. It was in childhood. It was, 100%. But then it disappeared, and then it came back right after you left service.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, it was while I was living that lie and that being that character and being that ultra, great analogy that I don't think I used in the book, but it's one of my favorite movies of all time for a reason. But I was the Ed Norton character, as a kid, and then in Fight Club, and then I created the Brad Pitt character. Right. And then the Brad Pitt character survived up until the moment I got out of the military. And then that character died. And then I was thrown back into the Ed Norton character. And I could never go back to the cool version of myself that I had created.
In your military service, is it true that I heard you can't swim?
Sort of. Let me be clear. It's not that I can't swim, like you throw me in the water and I'm gonna.
Of course,
yeah, I know how to swim. The problem is I don't float, at all, not even a little bit. So, I don't float. Now it is actually much harder for me to swim because this hand doesn't really. It just doesn't really pull water right. But I am 100% about as weak of a swimmer as you can be. And the water survival stuff in the military, in, Ranger Battalion, and then the next unit, that stuff, actually, you asked me a question about was anything hard? Yes, that. Any water stuff for me was really exceedingly difficult. And I remember being a kid and being in swim class, swim, actually, ironically, it was literally called Sergeant's Swim School, sort of God. And I remember, they're like teaching me how to swim, and I'm doing it, and my head is underwater each time I'm going for a breath. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? And they're like, oh, you're doing it wrong. And I'm just like, and I just remember being a kid and just being like, why can't I do this right? And it wasn't until many years later, actually in Iraq, this guy that I was on a team with who had went to Army scuba school, which is, very difficult. He was like, dude, everyone floats. And we went into actually a pool in Baghdad at the place we were staying along the river. And he spent about 20 minutes with me. And finally he's like, dude, you're right. You don't float. And I'm like, I know, I tried to tell you that. So yeah, I'm not a good swimmer at all.
Let's talk a little bit about you getting into past the Rangers. I mean, that was the first time you saw combat was with the Rangers.
Yeah.
What was that feeling? You'd played war your whole childhood. This is all you ever wanted to do. You get there, and a lot of soldiers up until the time, when 9/11 hit, like you said, didn't have combat experience, but you actually get to experience it. Talk about those feelings and those emotions and the first time you actually know, like, this is it.
So, for me, I was going to get out around, I was, my ETS date was coming up, and 9/11 happens, and they're pushing me to reenlist, and I was like, look, once we get orders to Afghanistan, I will reenlist that day. And sure enough, we got orders to Afghanistan, and actually I didn't reenlist that day. I reenlisted overseas because there was a bonus. But my point being is I reenlisted for 6 years in Afghanistan. And again, 9/11, obviously, horrible tragedy. And I don't want people to take this negatively, but I think for myself, and I think for a lot of the military, there was a level of excitement of deploying. I mean, it was exciting. I remember I couldn't wait to go. I mean, we thought we were going to leave, October, September 12th, we thought we were going to leave. Boy, were we wrong. But when I finally got to Afghanistan, at the time I was a sniper team leader at that time. And by the time we got there, I mean, it was pretty interesting. I mean, it was like there was no infrastructure. People were still getting blown up in Bagram, clearing out, buildings the Russians built, in the 80s. So it was kind of it was the Wild West. I mean, I remember in Kandahar, there was just it looked like Vietnam. You know what I mean? As far as the bases and just the improvised nature, there was nothing built. It was all sandbags. So it was an interesting time, and I was part of which I think I was lucky to, we got there right after Anaconda, and so my team was pushed out to one of the outstations on the Paki border. So Anaconda kind of pushed everyone east, and we got pushed out to build the outstations on the border that turned into, all the names, the Restrepos, the Korrigal Valley, that whole, basically everywhere along the Pakistani border. And for me, it was just, I was just excited to be there. I like you said, I mean, when you train for something long enough, there's just a certain level of excitement and happiness when you finally get to do it, and on top of that, leading a sniper team was just awesome. I had read, I mean, I grew up in the 80s. I read every Vietnam story there was, the LRPs, and, so for me, leading, 4-day missions, on our own, which I'm pretty confident they wouldn't send a 4-man Ranger sniper team or a 3-man sniper team with a attached TAC P or JTAC out on their own away from the wire, but they did back then. And I had a great time, to be honest. It was kind of a dream come true.
You remember the first time you're behind the trigger on it?
For me, the story that really opened my eyes, for lack of a better term, and I'm pretty sure I told the story in the book of that the farmer that we came across. That, my finger was on the trigger on that one, and it was this realization. For context, I'll say briefly, we were moving on one of these missions. This is either a 3 or 4 day, but I'm pretty sure it's the first one. So it's probably the 3. And we went out and we were crossing, it was at night. We were crossing an area, whatever. And this dog starts barking. This farmer comes out and, he's got a gun in his hands and he's, immediately we had nods on. He doesn't. It's dark. And, there's 4 lasers on him. And I was the team leader. And, my finger goes on the trigger. And it was just this realization that, first of all, if I shot him, everyone was shooting him because that's the way it works.
Sympathetic fire.
Yep. And secondly, I just had this realization that if I had pulled the trigger, there's no CSI, there's no freaking 911. There's no cops showing up. There's no FBI. No one's coming. It's the 5 of us here in this field in the middle of nowhere. And it was just this recognition of power, but not in a good way, more in a way that I was like, shit, like you don't realize. And the reason I'm bringing it up is you don't realize in normal society how many things are held in place only by the consequences that would result if somebody did something. When you're in a war zone like that and there's no consequences, and that was the first time I realized if I kill this person, there's no consequences. I mean, there is, but there isn't. It would be probably one conversation with my, with the commander, back at the outstation, which was, yeah, we killed a guy. Did he have a gun? Yes, he did, which he did. And I quite honestly don't think there would have been a second conversation. And so that night, in that moment, that was when it kind of hit me that, you really have to know who you are and what you stand for, because the decisions that I made with my finger on that trigger in a split second, are going to reverberate with me for the rest of my life. And all of those thoughts that I just explained to you took place in, maybe 5 seconds. And then I just realized that this guy's not, he's hearing a barking dog and he's coming to check it out. I don't think he's, here to kill us or, kill Americans, whatever. And so I took my finger off the trigger. I turned my laser off. Everyone else turned theirs off, and we waited a minute and we kept moving when he went back inside. So for me, that was more, that was more of an important moment for me than the times that I pulled the trigger, just because that happened first. And it was a realization that every time I decide I'm only going to pull the trigger if I am 100% confident that I absolutely need to. And I am lucky in the sense that I had that moment and I had that awareness, because I can honestly say there's nothing I regret doing that I did overseas. I didn't do anything that I truly regret, except one thing, which is not killing this guy, which is a much longer story. So I actually regret not killing someone because I didn't
Can
know
we talk about it?
Sure. So when the night I got blown up, the you know, it's a long story, but the it's detailed in the book. But going into that house, there was a lot of gunfire from inside the house to outside the house, and then clearing through it, I came across. I'm pretty sure I think I entered the room alone. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't remember. It was pretty chaotic at that time. And anyways, I came into a room, I made a right-hand turn, and the barrel of the AK hit me in the chest, literally, stopped me. And I was under nods. It was very dark in the house. I was under nods, and it happened so fast that the guy didn't even realize that, I was there already. But behind him, and I want to say it was purple or pink, but to be honest, my memory isn't the best from that whole evening. But I'm pretty sure that, like, under my nods, I remember seeing either a purple or a pink behind him, and it was his wife. It was like a nightgown, a robe, I don't know. And and again, I don't even know. I don't know even. It's weird because I remember seeing that color, but I don't remember how I saw that color because I don't remember any light. I was under nods. I usually looked, kind of part nods and part not. But somehow I knew that there was someone behind him. So I didn't fire, and I just took a half step or really a quarter step diagonal to the left. And I basically, took the gun out of his hands and stepped away from the barrel, obviously. And I took the gun out of his hands, and then I ended up pulling him out of the room and throwing him, and he got, pulled outside and all that. But the point of the story is, so I didn't shoot him because there was a woman behind him. And at that time we were very aware of, rounds going through people and killing non-combatants, etc. So did I make the right tactical decision in the moment? I mean, I made a decision in the moment. Could I have done that half step to the left and shot him, at a 45-degree angle, not, with the person behind him? Absolutely. But it happened so fast. I obviously didn't think about it. The point of the story is at the, I didn't know it then, but come to find out, quite some time later, there was a lot of bad guys on that target. And that guy was the head. He was the facilitator. He was the big bad guy. And every single person there died except him. And he only didn't die because of what I just explained to you. And he was facilitating suicide bombers and IEDs and all this at the time. And he was part of another well-known person in Iraq at the Times network. And so I regret, not doing something different because, post Abu G, I don't know what happened to him. He could have went through the system, got out, and then continued, blowing up people and killing Americans. And I don't know. I don't know what happened, but that was the only thing that I thought of and regret because he was only alive because of me, not shooting him when I absolutely should in the moment. It happened quickly. So that's my biggest regret from anything overseas.
With the regret though, do you think that because he's out, it's what he does is on you now?
Well, I mean, it's not on me, or it wasn't on me, but I mean, for me, it would have just been, I just would have, I just would have known that he wouldn't have been able to hurt anyone else, had I
Right.
uh, uh, not, it's not like I was like, I'm going to let him live. It was just, it was
Five
just something.
seconds is not a lot of time to.
Oh yeah, it happened probably in two. It was so quick. And so, um, I just, I think also because that ended up being the night that effectively ended my military career, that maybe I have more, anger. It was his house. You know what I mean? It was that the everything technically he was responsible for. So, um, maybe there's part of that, residual anger from the loss of my own career that I maybe would have felt better at, had he not lived to fight another day.
We need to talk a little bit about your injury because I think that's what leads to the rest of your story.
Oh, yeah.
Just how just how you receive the injury. We can do a little more of the story that night. I don't want to take too much away from the book, but a little more of what happened, um, how it happened, because I think that is where we go into act 2 of your story.
Yeah. So, pretty much, almost directly after what I just explained, ended up moving into a hallway with another guy on my left, going down that hallway, probably made it halfway down. And I mean, it was the most intense gunfire I had ever felt. Uh, I mean, just really extreme. They were shooting through the wall and ended up hitting the guy to my left. I mean, it was just, one or two, probably full mags from an AK. It was a lot. I just remember being like, holy shit. And he got hit. And then we, obviously I was hit. We're like, yep, we cannot continue this direction. So we went back, and some other things happened, and we ended up, it's a long explanation that I would really have to draw out, but it was just, there's certain things that you come up with or come up upon in CQB specifically, um, or a better way to say it outside of CQB is, in infantry combat, look at World War II, look at any war ever. And there's just certain times that the terrain itself, heavily favors one side just because of the way that it plays out. And this was one of those scenarios. The way the hallway was, we were in a very bad position, and the insurgents that were in the other position had a pretty distinct advantage. And so we were trying to solve how we were going to assault their position without dying, because it was just not easy. And then the next thing I know, I think I was looking to my right. That's what I feel. And then the next thing I know, I was on the ground, looking up, and my nods were blown off. I've said this before, but I felt like, and I didn't know this analogy then, but I know it now from Avengers, but I felt like the Hulk grabbed me and did a Hulk smash. That's how I felt. And I just felt the power made me feel insignificant. I just felt, I felt like I saw, like, probably when people see an extreme weather event, they're in they see a tornado and they're just like, holy crap, the power of nature made me feel, insignificant. That's how I felt. And I was on the ground, I was looking up, my nods had been blown off. And I just remember seeing this weird, obviously everything was, the house was in Solder City, which is not a nice area. And it was very dirty. And so there was just freaking dust and smoke. And I remember looking down the hallway and seeing this, for lack of a better term, it looked like a portal to another dimension. It was like the smoke was like swirling with dust and smoke, and there was like embers that were still, I don't know. I assume maybe they were material that was burning. I'm not sure. The best way I can describe it is I was completely and utterly confused. Like, what the hell just happened? Now, I know that sounds weird because you should have some level of expectation of, like explosions or, but I didn't. Maybe because I didn't see the cause. I just felt the effect, and so I was just like, "What the fuck just happened?" And um, I eventually got up, and I knew within a couple seconds that my arm was really messed up. I mean, it was blatantly obvious to me that there was a 4 alarm fire. And this will sound strange, but it's how it felt. My arm felt like it wasn't there, and I know that sounds contradictory, but because it severed some of the nerves, I could feel the feeling was that it was gone, if that makes sense. And so I thought initially that it was, completely blown off. And so my brain flashed to Saving Private Ryan, and I felt, I started like, I couldn't see anything. It was very dark. And I started like feeling for my arm, which again, didn't really make any sense, but my brain just kind of always goes to movie scenes. So I'm not exactly shocked that I did that. And then I was aware that there was still, pretty much a bigger gunfight going on at that point. There was a guy that was standing to my right when the explosion happened. I, you know, I had no idea where he was. Like literally, far as I was concerned, he disappeared. I couldn't see him in the room. I don't know where he went. Now, knowing what I know, I think it blew him all the way to the very back corner. But I just like he was there, and the next thing you know, he disappeared. And so I was like, all right, like I said, the fighting I was somewhat aware of was pretty intense. So I'm like, I need to check out this wound because I knew it was bad. And so I walked outside to a back, I guess, patio for lack of a better term, and it had a porch light on the back patio, and I looked at my arm, and I can't remember the image exactly to this day, but I just remember looking at it, and it reminded me of like when a butcher starts cutting a leg off of a cow, or you know what I mean. It was mangled, it was hanging there just by skin. And I remember looking at it and being like, yep, well, that's gone. And just I was like, it was so mangled, I'm like, that my arm's gone. And then I also was very aware that I had an arterial bleed. That was obvious to me. And so at that point, I was like, I had this weird thought that, okay, I'm going to lose my arm. And, it's my right arm. That's annoying. But that's okay. I need to fix this arterial bleed, or I'm going to bleed out and die. And that would just be stupid. And I very, very clearly remember saying to myself, that would just be stupid, which I don't know why I said that, but I did. And then on the way into the house on the beginning of the assault, I don't even remember how I went over it, but there was a wall around around the backyard. And I don't remember if we popped a ladder, if I jumped it, I don't remember, but I went through it pretty quick. And now in this state, I looked at that wall and I'm like, yep, not going over that. And so I just went to one of the sides, turned around, put my back on to it, and sunk down the wall. And basically tried, miserably to put on a tourniquet, because the way they show you to put on a tourniquet is like this. And that wasn't going to work with my arm. So luckily, very luckily for me, a guy got to me pretty quickly from what I remember, and put the tourniquet on me that definitely saved my life. No doubt. I mean, many people saved my life and my arm that night, but this guy in particular, uh, did the first, the first action that was obviously significant. And if you want to hear a crazy story, I'm sure I mentioned this in the book, but that guy that put the tourniquet on my arm happened to be the guy that in Afghanistan, when I was a Ranger, he was from the unit leading the ASO team, or no, AFO. God, it's been a while. He was leading the AFO team at the outstation, and a couple of things we did, they didn't have a sniper team with them, so he took my team, and he was the team leader of the AFO. Working with him was what made me decide to put in a packet when I got back. Cut 2 years later, he's the guy that puts the tourniquet on my arm. What are the odds?
Well, I don't even think that's the craziest part of the story. Let's talk about pain medication and trying to get you calm out there.
Yeah, that sucked. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he I think it was him. It might've been somebody else. Again, I was obviously a little out of it, but we carried morphine auto injectors on us, and I carried mine in my upper right sleeve pocket, which was now destroyed. So, I mean, maybe they were in the house. I don't know. And so I went with my left hand to grab them. There was none there. And I was like, son of a bitch. And I believe, I'm assuming, took one of his own, or I also had a med packet. He might have grabbed it out of there. I don't know. But anyways, he hit me with the auto injector. And again, I've seen all the Vietnam movies, read all the Vietnam books. So, they hit the guys with morphine, and, they're miserable, and they start being like, oh man, they start feeling great. So I was like, oh, thank God. Cause the pain, it sucked. And he hits me with the morphine auto injector, and I don't know, maybe 5 minutes go by, and, he's like, how you doing? And I'm like, still feel pretty shitty, like I don't feel any better. And then he or someone else gave me another one. Another 5 minutes go by, and I'm like, I feel absolutely no better. Actually, that's not true. I actually felt worse at that time, because the arm, hurt significantly, but shock's an interesting thing. Obviously, I was in shock, and shock, it's like there's a massive amount of pain, but you have some level of disassociation from it. It's the best way I could describe it. But when the tourniquet was on, the tourniquet is put on the good part of my arm, obviously to stop the blood flow. And so the tourniquet hurt like a motherfucker, I mean, we all have practiced the tourniquets, so we know, but we never go true tourniquet, tightness in practice. So let me tell you, yeah, true tourniquet tightness fucking hurts like hell. And so I was actually more miserable technically than in the beginning because of the tourniquet, and nothing happened from the morphine. Absolutely nothing. At a certain point, I think our medic, who I knew pretty well, had gotten to me, and he gave me a fentanyl, what we called a fentanyl lollipop. By the way, first time I've ever heard, had ever heard of fentanyl was, those lollipops. And so that was the first time sucking on that thing. And then he's like, freaking, break it and chew it up, to hit you quicker. That was the first time that I had felt a little better. And cut to years later, actually, sorry, not years later, about 6-ish weeks later, it turns out that I am morphine intolerant. My body does not process morphine. It gives zero fucks about morphine, and it doesn't work at all, which I detail how I found out that in the hospital. but yeah, so I think they started testing, people for that, at least at the unit, to give them an alternative. But yeah, we didn't know it at the time. So, and then I was super lucky. I was lucky because where we happened to be. I mean, I'd done missions freaking 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours from any serious medical services by helicopter. And this, where Solder City is or was, happened to be about what I assumed to be a 10-minute little bird ride to the hospital. So I was very, very lucky that it was so close. And the Casevac we used, I'm not sure if they were troop ones or CAS ones. I'm not sure, but what they ended up doing was sticking me in the hellhole. I think they dropped something out of the hellhole, and a stretcher will not fit in there. So I think they put me on an Israeli litter, whatever it was, and the medic literally laid on top of me to basically keep me in there, and that's how they evac me to the helicopter, to the cache, which I'm pretty sure that was a shitty ride for him, just basically trying to keep me from flying out. But he did, and again, I won't mention his name for security reasons, but again, his actions on the objective with me and my arm absolutely saved my life, unquestionably saved my arm. And being in that unit was so, I mean, just the level of medical care was so ridiculously good, that I later ended up, which I tell the story about the medical vac bird, which I'll leave in the book. But you're spoiled when it comes to trauma care and medical care in general.
Do you ever think in that night that it's over? Your career is over. This life is over.
No, not at all. No.
That's interesting to me, though, that you never thought that, especially seeing how mangled your arm was and seeing the level of injury, that you thought that you could come back from it.
Well, let me say it differently. Sorry. That night I wasn't thinking about
Of course.
anything, just because I was, on a lot of drugs. And then when I got to the hospital, they gave me Demerol, and I was fucking out of it. But then the next morning when I woke up and my arm was, so when they gave me Demerol and were sending me to surgery, the doctor literally told me that they were going to cut my arm off. Actually, he didn't say that. He said they were more than likely going to cut it off. And at that point I was like, do your worst, man. I was, super high on drugs. I was like, whatever, cut my legs off too. I don't give a shit. And
it's probably not the best idea to say to somebody.
Yeah, no, I was, I defer to making jokes when I'm nervous.
Right.
So, and
goes
so
back to your dad in the hospital.
Exactly. I never thought of it. That's true. So, so the next morning when I woke up and my arm was there, the fact that it was there gave me the false hope that, that I was going to be, to me, I thought I had relied for years at that point on my willpower to get me through things. I relied on physical strength to get me through bad technique. I remember doing the O course one time, and the instructor's like, you're lucky you're strong because your technique is shit, And I always remember that, just because at the time I thought it was a compliment, and now I realize that it wasn't. And he was right. I should have had better technique rather than just, I think at the time I was literally hanging upside down on a tree, and it was, I should have, done something different. But my point being is I thought that I could solve anything with willpower. And So it never occurred to me that, when you lose parts of your arm, willpower is not going to overcome that. But it took me realistically maybe almost a year before I came to terms with that.
Why do you think it was that you didn't want anyone there? When you're recovering, you're in the hospital and you're on your road to recovery. You didn't want anyone there.
I've had a couple people ask me that. I have a couple answers for it that I think are all true. I wouldn't be able to separate one from the other, but one, my mom, just is kind of, kind of hysterical with, like, you know what I mean? It's my mom. Like, I get it. And so I think part of it was I just didn't want, I just didn't feel, or I didn't have the energy to, like, I was aware that if people came there, I would feel the need to make them feel better, if that makes sense.
No,
And I
100%.
didn't have the energy for it. You know what I mean? I just was like, I need to focus on healing and getting through this. If they're here, I'll try and cater to them rather than focusing on myself getting through this. That's part of it. I think the other part was I just didn't, if they were there, me being alone in the hospital was like an alternate universe. It was like the multiverse. And I suddenly was, it wasn't reality because no one I knew was there. It was like, you know what I mean? It was this other place. And I felt, I think subconsciously, that if I would have allowed, people that, I cared about to be there, that it would have made it real. It would have been like reality showing up, and their reaction would have made me feel the gravity of the situation. So I think the other reason why I didn't want anyone there was just so I could isolate and compartmentalize what I was going through versus the reality of basically I think I was compartmentalizing a temporary reality rather than, long-term reality, if that makes sense.
Do you think it goes anything back to when you talked about your childhood where you just tried to be quiet and not make trouble for anybody? Do you think that has anything to do with it at that point?
100%, 100%. That would be directly exactly what I said the first part, which is if they were there, I would feel the need to make them feel better and not, and calm them and do all those things. So for me, it was, it's better for me. I'm less of a problem if they're not here, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
I absolutely think that was part of it.
Absolutely.
Now, and again, I've went back and forth with this, with this decision that I made a long time ago. I went through a period where I felt very guilty about it and felt like, oh man, I can't believe you did that. That was so selfish. And then I went through the opposite where I was like, no, it was the smart thing to do to focus on your healing, and then I went back and forth. Now I kind of just look back and go, like, I see it both ways. It probably was selfish to a degree, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that was a time to not be selfish, if that makes sense.
No. And I also think though that that's the way you protected yourself. You couldn't do it as a kid. Now you control the situation. And that was a way to stop all that from, in the past. So in reading the book, the person that I thought that you would want to be there is the person that you had this loving relationship with. At that time in the book, it seemed like It was kind of the perfect relationship. You were happy, she was happy,
Yeah.
but you didn't want her there.
No.
I'm trying to figure that out. I get the family. I understand why you didn't want them there because there's a whole history there.
Yeah.
But what was the reason that you didn't want her there?
So, again, I had my reasons at the time, which I would say were, at the time, I would have said the same thing as what I said in relation to my family. Knowing what I know now, I realized that the reason that I didn't want her there was because I was worried that she would see me as weak. I was worried, I was living that relationship that she got into was with a character I created. And so I was worried that if she was there, she would see that I was struggling, that I was hurt, that I was not doing well. I mean, it's hard to describe how bad I felt with some of the things that happened in the hospital, which I detail in the book. But there's no world in which you feel good about yourself when nurses are having to reach up your butt and pull poop out by their hands. There's no way you're going to feel, you're not going to feel like a man when they're doing that. And you're going to feel, I felt so guilty. And I would apologize to the nurses. It took 2 nurses to hold me up, one on each side, and one literally reaching up my butt and pulling out poop because I was, on the pain meds didn't allow me to I was so constipated. It was ridiculous. And I mean, I just felt shattered, and I didn't want her to see that shattered version of me. So it was really about my fear. I think at that moment I had already reverted to the scared kid who didn't value themselves. And I was subconsciously worried that she was going to see, quote unquote, the real me without the armor up.
Did you ever think at some point she's going to have to? You just going to disappear?
I thought at the time, again, I thought that once I had some of the surgeries that, I'd also lost a bunch of weight. I mean, I looked like shit. I had been working out twice a day. I was in phenomenal shape before I got hurt. And so I think I just thought, after I get out of the hospital and, I start to become myself again, and everything will be fine. I don't want her to see me in this state. But once I get out, I'll get back to normal and everything will be fine. That was what I was telling myself at the time. That was my thought process.
Do you think she would leave you if she saw you in that state?
So again, I wasn't consciously aware of why I was doing what I was doing. So no, I didn't think that consciously. And I don't even think I thought that subconsciously. And she wouldn't have at all. I mean, she didn't leave, things got worse and she didn't leave. So again, it had nothing to do with her actions. It had to do with my own perception of myself. And again, it was my lack of value, thinking that people would only stay with me if I was never a problem, which obviously ties directly into what we talked about with how I was in my family.
So when you get out of the hospital and you're with the girlfriend, you guys kind of start a life. You decide that you're going to move to Las Vegas, get a house, kind of get on with life. You know that you're going to get out of the military.
Yeah. It took a while. I mean, this was
of course. But once all of that is done and you step away from that life and now you have this new life, you have someone that now wouldn't have left you or anything like that. It seems like almost from the very beginning in the book, when you go to Las Vegas and you buy the house, there's fire on the wings of the plane. Is that a fair?
I wouldn't say at that time there was fire yet. I would say that there was sparks happening, somewhere inside the wing. It wasn't flames yet. That took about a year of being out there before the fire on the wings started. I was, I wasn't happy that I was getting out, but then when I was getting out, like I think probably most people, there's a certain level of freedom that that you're excited about. So, and moving somewhere new and all the different stuff. And because I was in the military in my 20s, I didn't go to college. I didn't have a fun party phase, you know what I mean? That a lot of, kids that go to college do. So, I was kind of excited to have freedom and just not be under the military's, finger with making my own decisions. So I was initially excited about that. So that kind of carried like the first year of being out, in Vegas. It took about a year, which by the way, I think is freaking unfathomably common when guys get out. Like the first year is fine. You know what I mean? Because it's like a long vacation. You know what I mean? And you don't really, it doesn't feel like reality that you're not going back until I think after that first year. Between 1 and 2 years, in my experience with, talking to a lot of guys, that's when you start going, that's when things start changing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's more of a, I guess this would be the word, like a rebellious. You're out. You don't have to listen to someone. You don't have to get up, go to PT. You don't have to, there's none of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I agree with that.
It feels good. Yeah, it feels good.
I think the first time I was shocked in the book where I was like, holy shit, was when you guys go out, you go to a club and you decide to tell her that she should be a dancer. And let me just tell you before we get into it, when I read that and I was like, who and how the fuck does someone think that this will turn out anything but bad?
So, there's things in the book that are, obviously everything's to a degree oversimplified from reality because
of course,
but there's a little bit more to it than me just saying that. But there's other factors that were involved. But still, at the end of the day, did I say, was it? Did I sign off on it, and was it partly my idea? Yes. And what I now know is you said, in what world did you think that was going to work out in a good thing? And what I now know is subconsciously, I knew it was going to, like, I was creating chaos. That was me creating chaos. Not consciously. Consciously, I was like, oh, it'll be fun. And I mean, but also in my defense, our relationship was so good at that time that I really wasn't worried. I wasn't worried about her doing it. I wasn't worried about the potential for what could happen. Because again, everything had been great up until that point, and we were, very much, had been a team. So that being said, subconsciously, did I know I was creating chaos, or subconsciously was I creating chaos? Absolutely, no doubt in my mind, and I created a shit ton of it. And yeah, it definitely led to probably way more chaos than I ever could have hoped for subconsciously. But yeah, it was, it was also, we were young. We had just moved to Vegas. It was, you just think differently then. You know what I mean? Like you don't, it was just, let's have fun, make money, and live, and party and live life. That was my mentality at that time. Was just, it was very hedonistic at that time.
Does any of the father stuff start to like circulate in your head like I'm becoming him? That hedonistic, and that's what I mean by
Not then, because at that time I didn't know anything. I shouldn't say that. I there's things about him that I found out later,
okay.
when I decided to start having a relationship with him. There was things that I found out from him that I was like, that quite honestly truly shocked me. I mean, things that he told me that he had done when he was younger, that I was like, holy shit, I did exactly that. And it's not like I was following in his footsteps, because I didn't know
Right.
that had happened. So at that time, no, it wasn't until later I found out a lot of, things from his past that really surprised me. I mean, I knew when he was younger, he got in fights all the time, and, and he started drinking when he was like, 12 or something like that. So I knew, you know, I knew stuff. I knew he used to go party with his friends. And I mean, he was in the 60s, he was that guy freaking going to bars and getting in fist fights. But I didn't know the extent. I didn't know anything about drug use. It was years later that I found out all that stuff, and the similarities were frightening.
Well, speaking of the drug use, I think we should talk about a little more of the chaos that you put. I want to talk about, because, like you said, you didn't drink beer, you'd never done drugs. And I don't think you drank very much at that time. You drank, but I don't think it was a whole bunch.
The first drink I ever had, like legitimately, no joke, was after we got back from Afghanistan. We went to, literally, the night that we landed, I think in the afternoon, and then that night, I don't know, 10 of us went to a bar in Seattle, and they, basically guilted me into, having a shot. And I had turned down alcohol freaking thousand, probably more than 1,000 times before. But that was one where I was like, okay, I was kind of, it was an occasion that just didn't say no to. And then, so I had drank, a little bit for maybe a couple years, never beer, only hard alcohol. And then the first date with Brandy in the book was the first wine I'd ever had.
Right.
And then I drank literally, I think, a whole bottle, like, oh, it's just wine. And I was fucked up. And it was literally it was from 7-Eleven. I had a massive hangover the next day. Yeah.
They're
I
known
remember,
for their vintage at 7-Eleven.
yeah. Oh yeah. That's premium grade Napa Valley right there. I remember it was $7 the bottle, but yeah, no, you know, drinking, I didn't drink until I got back from Afghanistan, and I had literally never done drugs of any kind. I mean, when I got surgeries, I got like 2 surgeries, I didn't even take the pain meds, and I didn't touch any of that stuff. And then, of course, obviously I was on a shit ton of medications in the hospital, and then out of the hospital. Every surgery I got on pain meds, and then I had to get off them, and then I would have to go back to surgery, and that cycle went on for years.
How many drugs do you think you were on? Not, I'm not talking about recreational drugs. When you were on all of this medication at the biggest time, how many do you think you were on?
I mean, at least probably 10 different medications from what I remember. Dilaudid, Oxycontin, Neurontin. I mean, yeah, there was a bunch. Those were the big ones I remember specifically. But yeah, I was on probably 8 to 10. I'd say 8 to 10. When I went to the VA at a point, they gave me, I believe, 10 that I took, which weren't for pain. They were, and it was, that was worse than the other meds. The mental health meds were worse than the physical health meds.
Do you think that when you added this chaos of the recreational drugs in, when you tried it for the first time, do you think it was coping? Do you think it was escape? Do you think it was rebellion? What do you think it was that made you make that jump to light speed?
It was, trying to figure out how to tell the story. Basically, what happened was my girl at the time, who was working at the gentleman's club, ended up, taking ecstasy with, some dude, with some of her friends. Drugs are common there. And I was I felt, go back to my childhood. A big part of my childhood was feeling left out, not part of the group, not being invited. Right. So the next night, she still had some, and her and a bunch of her girlfriends, and we were all going out, which I still remember. It was to the Playboy Suite at the Palms. I took it to be a part of the group, to fit in, to feel accepted, and probably also out of, repressed anger that she had taken it, the night before with some rando dude without me. So I took it to, and escape. All the above, probably, from what you're saying, but I think probably fitting in, and kind of, being on the same level vibe as the group was probably foremost in my subconscious, not my conscious.
So in the same thing with drugs, prostitution, is there internal resistance? Is there guilt? Is
Oh
there,
yeah,
or
there's guilt's not the right word. The correct word is toxic shame. It's a level of shame that just makes you hate yourself, fundamentally, and it's a cycle. You do drugs and freaking, uh, you know, go to visit a prostitute, um, and then you feel this absolutely intense level of shame the next day, and then you hate yourself for it, and then you go, I'll never do that again, and then you don't for a while until certain things build up, and and then the cycle, um, the circuit breaks, and then you do the same thing and it repeats. And I did that for decades, not years, decades. So I'm very familiar with the cycle of that addiction, and shame. Guilt is something that, is reasonable. You can feel guilt over something, like, oh yeah, shit, I feel guilty for that. And guilt can be, it's okay to feel guilty, but feeling true toxic shame over something is much bigger than guilt, because toxic shame, the term really ties to something going back. Toxic shame means it's tying back to a fundamental sense of innate badness or lack of self-worth. And that's the difference, I would argue, between shame and guilt, or toxic shame and guilt.
so when you're doing this, would you say the fire's on the wings now?
Oh, I'd say oh no, the fire started, like I said, probably a year after, we lived there. And what really happened, what created the fire was, after that year, I was still doing surgeries at that time. I was doing surgeries for, I think, 2 years, after I got out, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't use my right hand or my right arm, really. And so there's not a lot I could do. And I just went into a massive, what I'm betting was definitely a clinical depression. Plus, my hormones, I didn't know, but I'm sure were in the gutter. My testosterone was probably 8. That wasn't a thing that people even talked about back then. But knowing what I now know, it's pretty obvious that, everything changed significantly, for me. And so I was so depressed. I would just stay in my office and I started playing video games. I played, a game called Silk Road and World of Warcraft for like a year. Like literally I would play all day long. And then, and if she was working, I would play all night. And if she wasn't, then I'd play in the daytime, and at night we would go out, and I did that for like a year.
Is it true that you play Warhammer 40K too?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't much then because I couldn't, assemble or paint.
Right.
But yeah, I have a pretty big collection.
Yeah. When you're going through all of this, when you're locked away, I want to talk about a big moment in Las Vegas. The one that I don't know if the word is I felt sorry for you, but you and I have talked about it. And it's when you became security for the Mac store.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
I don't even know that I can describe to you why, but I looked at this guy that was this bigger than life thing, in the global war on terror. And now you're guarding a Mac cosmetic store. And I thought,
I'm guarding $20 lipstick.
Right. You got to tell me how you feel about that.
I mean, I did it. I told you on the phone, I did it because I was, starting a security company at the time, and I was trying to get, clients, and basically this company out of LA had this contract. They didn't have anyone in Vegas to manage it. So I was like, okay, I'll manage it. And just, it takes time to find good people to, do that job that you can count on. And so more often than not, I had to do it myself. And so, yeah, I was standing there in the Caesar's Forum shops in a suit, literally at the front of a Mac makeup store, watching women put on lipstick, and, as a loss prevention person, which, it definitely was a lesson in humility, no doubt about it. But at the same time, regardless of anything I had done in the military, I was new to the security space. So I was okay, putting my time in and learning loss prevention. And I was really at the time motivated to understand, the security industry and all that. So did I every once in a while think to myself, I can't believe I'm standing here doing this, thinking about, jumping off a little bird onto a freaking rooftop and, blowing the door open. Yeah, of course. I thought of that sometimes. Like I never thought I would end up here. But at the same time, I would temper that also with, you're not better than any security person in this mall. You know what I mean? Like fundamentally, just because of what you did in the military doesn't make you better than anyone here. So I always tried to temper my own ego with a just a greater understanding of more with just trying to learn as much as I could, and just keep building it. I just saw it as like the step one to building a security company at that time.
Where do you think in all of this, because I can't imagine that you say that you tempered it, your ego and everything, but I can't imagine that you're not into self-loathing and stuff at this time, at least a little bit.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, but again, I would argue, self-loathing was probably my default state, other than the time I was in the military. It was definitely my default state, prior to the military as a teenager. And then it became my again, my default state when I got out. So yeah, I mean, you know, negative self-talk is something that I did so often and so automatically and unconsciously that to this day, I mean, it's still the default programming, and I have to consciously take control to reframe the narrative, because negative self-talk is very, very difficult to change when you've done it your whole life.
That's got to be exhausting, though.
It is, honestly, it is. It is very exhausting. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is absolutely exhausting, and you know, I'll state here, like, you know, the key that I had to recognize, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, and one of the things I'm going to tell anyone is, if you truly want to change something, it takes work. And can it be exhausting? Yes, but it's the only way that you're going to go down a different path. If you don't change something and put in that work, you're going to, all the paths are going to go the same way they've gone before. And so, yeah, it can be frustrating, but I know that I have to keep doing it to create a new path for myself.
Not to get into the weeds of it, but you know, you and Brandy, there's a lot more that goes on in the relationship. You eventually break up. The point that I want to point out in there is that there was some cheating that went on. I'm bringing that up just for a reason. There'll be more, but
Yeah.
You make more decisions about females in your life later on that lead to the same thing. You seem like you pick things up quickly, except in this one area. And you and I had talked about that on the phone.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out why the same things continue to happen in your relationships.
Probably fundamentally, what I now know is that women are like freaking ninjas at being subconsciously aware of a man's level of commitment and true commitment and authenticity. And commitment comes with authenticity. So for me, I didn't realize that even though consciously I felt like I was fully committed, and I did consciously feel that way. And consciously I felt, oh, I love this person and I want to marry this person, all those things. That's how I consciously felt. But what I didn't realize was, first of all, that's impossible if you don't love yourself and if you don't value yourself. So while consciously I was thinking that I felt that way, I was subconsciously always had one foot out the door. And I wasn't giving any of the relationships I was ever in. I mean, for lack of a better term, you know, they were always dating a wild horse that, you know, that acted like it was going to stay in the stable, but in reality, it had never been broken. I mean, I subconsciously was always creating chaos. I was always, you know, there was no way that any girl I was with in the past had any level of true security with me. Even though I consciously thought that I was committed, I really wasn't. And so, you know, the times that I was cheated on, you know, yes, everyone makes their own mistakes, but ultimately, you know, they cheated on me because of, there's no way they felt secure with me. There's no way that they felt like, you know, I definitely always subconsciously had one foot out the door. And it took me many years to realize. It wasn't until it happened the second time. You know, the first time I blamed the girl. The second time I went, oh man, the common factor here is me. And that's when I had to look at myself and see what I was doing that caused the same thing to happen twice.
Just like that, when you move into your Hollywood career, when you really start to, I think, get a foothold on life again, and you really start to I guess, take back control of your life. It seems like once again we're going to go back into that chaos thing where you are purposely trying to destroy everything around you and
Yeah.
yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered it, and I think of the times when you're talking about where you're going to work on Suicide Squad or you're going to work on movies and you're training with these people and life is going great and then the door closes and you become a completely different person. It's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to figure out, when you talk about that stuff, at what point do you tell yourself, like, what the fuck am I doing? Is there ever a point?
I mean, yeah, if you go back to like the toxic shame cycle that I mentioned earlier, yeah, every single time that I do something stupid, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I can't do this anymore. But again, if you don't, at those times, I was figuring out symptoms. Okay, this thing is happening that's causing me to do this. And all those symptoms, I would try and treat the symptoms, hoping that, you know, if I treated the symptoms, I wouldn't do that behavior again. The problem is the symptoms aren't the disease. And for many, many years, I didn't know what the disease was causing me to do these things. And so because I never even knew what the disease was, I couldn't, let alone cure it. So yeah, I would tell myself I'm never going to do it again. I would spend a lot of time to figure out, external factors or even internal ones. But again, they were just symptoms. They weren't the core problem. The core problem, as you know, is just a fundamental lack of valuing and loving myself. And it wasn't until I figured out that core problem that I was then able to actually, begin to treat it and therefore change, my chaos creating behaviors.
Yeah, because I think it was when you were doing Suicide Squad, where was it that you had the prostitute that you used frequently where you could like call and say, are you available tonight? And I think it was Suicide Squad.
Um, Again, the book is just a book. If I'm being honest, there was more than that one.
Well,
So,
no,
so
by no
maybe
means. No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying though
no,
that
but I'm saying I don't remember where it was in the book just because it did actually sadly happen multiple times. But I think it was. I think in the book we used it that there, but it actually happened multiple times in reality. But um, yeah, I mean, I mean, it was transactional, and but not that I want to justify um, prostitution, but I will say, I had a reason for transactional sex, and that reason was I figured out that I was not a good boyfriend with girls. I heard enough girls in my life to basically go, there's something wrong with me. You know, I'm just not treating women the way I want to treat them. And of course, I still had needs. I'm a dude, and so I looked at like transactional sex with prostitutes as a way to protect girls that I would date and hurt. That's the way I saw it. And I know that sounds probably weird to most people, but that's how I justified that lifestyle for a while. Was a prostitute knows the deal. She knows freaking. It's a very honest transaction in that sense, and so I just felt better about it than manipulating a girl for sex that wanted a relationship with me. I felt I hated doing that, and so that's how I justified that behavior for years.
you don't think it was to protect yourself at all? can't get hurt. They can't cheat on you. It's transactional.
No, well, yeah, I mean, probably both. I mean, realistically, I think it was both, but probably, I was telling myself that I was protecting the girls when, when I still think it was both, because I definitely did feel that way, and it worked. But yeah, I'm sure I was unaware of, that I was protecting my own my own emotions, because it's emotionless. You know what I mean? It's not. But again, that really didn't matter to me, because I wasn't feeling emotions generally with, most of the girls I was seeing or dating at that time. So, for many years, I was very, very robotic. I mean, very robotic, completely unfeeling, to the point where I was legitimately concerned that I may be a sociopath.
But
Which
if you're
is,
concerned about it, that means that you're probably not one.
I know, and I had a therapist literally say that exactly to me, and I was like, oh, I didn't really think about it that way, but I was just trying to self-assess, like, why do I not feel? Now I know it's because feeling got me hurt when I was younger, so I stopped doing it. Simple as that. And I created a character who didn't feel and didn't care, and I lived that character until that character died. And then I was stuck with feeling, and then burying it, and just, feelings happened, but I just wouldn't feel them. They would happen, and I would just bury them. And I did that for many, many years.
When's rock bottom?
Oh man. I would say rock bottom was when the other girlfriend cheated on me. I actually caught them together, and that one really shocked me. The other one, I wasn't that shocked, to be honest. This one really, really surprised me, and it really it made me. I mean, it just I don't know how to describe it. It made me just an absolute wreck. I mean, just I don't know if anyone can relate with this, but like, if you've ever had something happen in your life that just makes you an absolute, like the term mess, like an absolute mess. I was an absolute mess. I was angry, sad, like every emotion you can feel, I was feeling. I would literally I would go from 18 emotions in 5 minutes. I was just a mess. And I took a shit ton of drugs to try and suppress that. It didn't really help. It helped to a degree, and it also made things worse to a degree. And then that directly led to going to rehab, that I obviously talk about in the book. But I would say rehab wasn't the rock bottom. That period between her cheating and me catching them, and entering the facility, that was rock bottom. I was just a maniac. I was out of control, crazy, truly crazy, probably certifiable at that time.
Well, you're doing SEAL Team at the time, and actually, the first episode that you directed is going to come on. You had to watch it.
That was the second.
That was second rehab. Okay, but you were still doing SEAL Team at the time you go into rehab.
That season, which would be season 4, had just ended when this happened. Literally had ended a week prior.
So it's, once again with you, it's an extreme high. You end a season, it's a huge success, and you come crashing down within a week.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and there's a lot to that story too. I mean, that was when I had gotten, injured on my motorcycle, and I was taking a lot of, I was taking a lot of stimulants because I was taking a lot of pain meds, legitimately, because my body was fucked up, and I should have taken the rest of the season off. I didn't. I literally got hit by a car on my motorcycle. I mean, I can send you pictures if you want to put them up, but I was pretty messed up. I missed 2 days of work. I was back to work on Monday. Actually, I didn't miss any. I missed 1 day of work, which was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then I was back to work on Monday. So,
Because didn't you
I
go
was
to lunch? That's how it happened. You went to lunch or something, right? During
no,
the
I went.
shooting?
No, it was no. I think shooting was over, and I was at the gym, and I was going to an ATM. So I didn't wear my jacket, my motorcycle jacket. I just had my helmet on, and yeah, it was just a bad. I mean, it's just a ridiculous situation what happened. But so I was on a lot of pain meds because I was so messed up, and I was doing things I shouldn't have been doing on the show, and then I was taking stimulants to compensate for the derogatory the sleeping effect of the pain meds, and that just led to me. I mean, I was on quite a bit of meds every day, and then I basically got off them all on my own, and then I was pretty much sobering up for that week, and then at the end of the week, I caught her, and then of course I just grabbed a handful of pills and buried myself in them.
I got to ask you, which injury's worse? Getting blown up in Solder City or the motorcycle wreck? And the reason I ask that is because remember when we talked about Solder City, you said you were, it was crazy the amount of medical attention you could have and just the level of it and stuff. Plus you have all of that we talked about, the standardization of the Army and all of those kind of things to look forward to. Now you're out on your own. Life's not great. And you have this injury. So which one's worse?
I mean, the arm was worse just in it was years of surgeries, and obviously it affects my life daily now.
Of course.
Whereas the motorcycle thing sucked for 4 5 months maybe, and then I got surgery on my shoulder, and now it's not comparable to my arm. um but I mean, I've gotten injured quite a few times in my life, so I'm very used to kind of the cycle of what it of getting injured, and then figuring out how to bounce back from injury. So luckily for me, after the motorcycle incident, I knew so much that I had learned from my arm situation that I was able to apply that to that situation, and that helped dramatically.
And the only reason I asked that was because I would think with the motorcycle injury, not that it's a worse injury that you received, of course, when you got blown up, but the reason I would say that is because of just the level of shit that was raining down on you at the time, having to deal with everything that you were dealing with. I feel like would exacerbate that injury and that accident, however you want to call it.
Yeah. So I don't think I tell this in the book. My girlfriend was working. My girlfriend at the time was working in Hawaii, and when it happened, and you know she obviously couldn't help because she couldn't leave, and so she sent her mom over, who sadly passed away. I heard, um, but she came over, and she basically called her daughter and was like, it's bad. I mean, it was ridiculous. I literally, so I couldn't use my left arm. Obviously my right arm's messed up, and I couldn't use my right leg. So I couldn't use my right leg or my left arm, and I could barely use my right arm. So I really only had my left leg that could kind of like push me around on this like wheelchair thing. Um, Admittedly, it was ridiculous, and it was. It's going to sound stupid. I couldn't wipe my ass
Again,
because my hand, can't. It just my wrist doesn't move. I can't do it, And then because my shoulder was separated, I couldn't do it with my left hand. I mean, I figured it out, but it was very difficult. And so, yeah, it was, there was a good, 3 months or so that was, and also, by the way, I got surgery and literally entered rehab the day after my surgery, which not the best idea I've ever had. But they didn't really give me a choice, but I got out of the hospital, and they discharged me to the rehab facility.
Man. So when do you see the light? When do you start putting your life back together?
I mean, it started in rehab. It started there. It was 40. Well, it ended up being 60 days because I was technically at two places. But when you have 60 days away from everything, I mean, I wouldn't call it a vacation, but when you have 60 days to focus only on yourself, I would argue that few people, have the time to do that for themselves. So it's hard not to figure out a lot of shit when you spend 60 days thinking of it every day. So I had several notebooks, and I just spent pretty much every day trying to figure out, how did I get here? Like, what, obviously being here is the result of, here's the conclusion I came to. I'm in rehab, which means that all of my actions led me here. So the responsibility for being here is on me. So what are the things that I have done? What are the paradigms that I have viewed everything through? What are the thoughts in my head that have created that path that's led me here? Because it is my responsibility that I'm here. And when I really started looking at it and kind of CSIing, reverse engineering everything, it was very clear to me a lot of the mistakes, a lot of the things in the book came from, started at least in the awareness started in rehab, and then there was just certain things that other things that happened that would give me another piece of the puzzle, or meeting my current girlfriend, that was a major, I shouldn't say meeting her, but once we really were together, certain behaviors that she did, that was a huge puzzle piece for me.
Do you, I knowing you, I can't imagine that you didn't have a ton of self-hate while you're going through rehab, writing all this stuff and taking blame for it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I, well, not as much, just because in rehab, they try and create a healing culture, obviously. So self-hate, at least at Warrior's Heart, maybe not at the first one I was at, but the Warrior's Heart, tries to create a positive environment. So there probably wasn't as much self-hate as you'd expect. I mean, there was some, definitely, because like I said, I was there and I wasn't happy that my choices had led me there. But at the same time, it probably wasn't nearly as bad as had I, not been in that environment.
We gotta talk about Warrior's Heart a little bit. Tom's getting ready to come on the show soon.
Oh yeah. That's awesome.
But I feel like at Warrior's Heart was where you really kind of fundamentally at the cell level changed.
I don't know if I wouldn't say I changed there. I would say that I started, I would say that's more when I woke up, and later I changed, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like, there was just more realizations I just had a lot of realizations of myself and what I was doing, why I was doing what I was doing. I talked to, freaking 100, people that were there, and heard their story. And, I learned a lot there. I mean, they have, classes and stuff, and I learned stuff there, but I definitely learned more from just talking to people and seeing the similarities between everyone's story, the differences. And I took a lot of awareness out, but I don't think I really applied it truly until later. I mean, I didn't go back to rehab, which I guess in itself is, I never went back to that level of addiction. But again, you know, I could also probably make the argument that the level of addiction that I had been at that sent me to rehab was also kind of, I've explained the circumstances. So, I mean, I came off of, at one time, I was taking 30, uh, and I know that it's going to sound crazy, but I was taking a shit ton of pain meds per day, a shit ton. And I came down off of a crazy amount to zero on my own, no rehab. Just, I willed it. And I think because I had done that a couple times, I had this artificial sense that, again, I could just rely on my willpower to
Muscle
to
through
fix
it.
it, to muscle through it. And look, I mean, maybe, I'm confident that I would have been able to do it had I not caught my ex at that time. But I'm glad it happened because, I needed a major wake up call that I wouldn't have learned had I just, muscled through it.
Yeah, your form wasn't good. I think that's what you said before on the O course. Your form
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
right. It was
My technique. Yeah. My
your
technique.
technique.
My technique. Your
Let,
technique is shit.
yeah, let's talk about what you're doing now and kind of how your life has come full circle. Like we said, we've already mentioned SEAL Team. We need to talk about Two Fake SEALs, a hilarious podcast, I think. You're just you're kind of killing it now, man.
Well, I'm excited about the book, because I truly, truly believe that, that there's going to be differences, obviously many differences when people read my story between my life and theirs, but I think there's going to be more similarities. And so I'm excited to get the book out there, wide, and I really think it has the potential to educate people, maybe to certain, the whys of why they're doing what they're doing. And that's my hope. I wrote the book to be, I didn't have, I had no model to go off of, or, you know what I mean? I didn't know what I didn't know. And so my hope is that this book can save some people from making, some of the mistakes I made, or making them as long as I made them. My hope is just that it can be maybe show a light at the end of the tunnel, and maybe educate people on how they got themselves in the tunnel to begin with. And maybe best case, maybe help some people avoid the tunnel altogether.
Do you think that your life, if Solder City never happens, I always ask, do you think your life's different?
So here's my 2 cents on that. I think had it not happened, I am 99.9% sure that I would have stayed in for at least 20. My buddy's going on 28, that him and I were, homies and did everything together. He's still in. So I don't, knowing myself, I definitely would have stayed to 20. It's very possible I could have, I don't see myself, I wouldn't have seen myself leaving before him, but I could have. But either way, what I think would have been possible was that I don't think I would have figured out the fundamental issues, that I might have been able to get away living a life of without authenticity had the injury not happened. And so I'm actually glad that it happened. It's the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to confront the false reality, the false character I had created, and forced me to find authenticity and find my true self and value that true self truly.
Any advice to people that are going in, getting out, transitioning, just life in general, if they think that they might be headed down the same path?
I mean, obviously, I'm going to suggest read the book and see if anything, fits. But the other thing is, I think it's really important that we stop and take a real, a lot of people talk about, lies and lying to others, and what I don't think most people realize is, by far, the most lies anyone tells is to themselves, by far. And it really is important that you develop the ability to call bullshit on your own lies at yourself and recognize when you are, and for various reasons, but it's really important, I think, to take a real hard look at yourself, and really try and discover truth. And sometimes a lot of those are going to be really hard truths. For me, the hard truth, I mean, there's many, but one critical hard truth was, I am the reason that everything is fucked up in my life. I'm the reason. It's my fault. It's my actions that caused it. It's my mentality that caused it. It's my everything. And it was a hard truth that I had to suddenly take away, me blaming others, my ex, my, parents, my whatever, and go, you know what? It's on me. It's all on me. And, certain things that happened to me, getting blown up, my childhood stuff, were they my fault? No, but they're my responsibility. And it doesn't matter if it's your fault. It's still now your responsibility to work through it, overcome it, and heal from those things. So I would say the most important thing I could say is just spend some time really looking inward, rather than focusing outward.
I can see that. Let's talk about where people can find the book, where they can find you, social media links, websites. There's a lot of places. Let's even talk about where people can find the show and stuff like that.
Sure. If you want to find me, it's www.brazzers. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, I have a website actually that's tyleragray.com, Gray spelled with an E. My Instagram is Instagram /TylerAGray. And pretty much on my Instagram, I have a link tree, and you can find all my links. My book is on pre-order on Amazon right now. It is releasing 6 weeks to the day, or to the day that we recorded this. July 15th, the book is officially live. I'll just put this out there now because people have been asking. I am actually, in the next couple of weeks, going to go record the audiobook, so it's probably not going to be up until August. It's just a strange process. But yeah, anyone who orders the book on pre-order, send it to me and I'll autograph it. And then I think, and then Two Fake Seals on YouTube. And actually, let me mention too, my YouTube channel, which I'm just going to start. I created it, but I'm just going to start uploading actually tomorrow, which will be YouTube /TylerAGray. So yeah.
What's going to be on there?
So I'm doing, well, we'll see, where it goes. But for now, I'm basically going to be doing, you take the subjects of the book / subjects you and I have talked about, and I'm basically going to be doing expanded shorts, or shorts, but expanded parts, from where I basically take a subject like self-worth, just as an example, and going in a lot more depth in it, for 5 to 10 minutes, whatever the video happens to be. So it's really, I'm trying to make the YouTube videos basically a tutorial companion to the book on how to, how to develop self-worth. Okay, the book talks about self-worth. I have some lessons in the end of the book, as you know, but I want to do, I want to go in a lot more detail, and you can only go in so much detail in the book, obviously. And so the YouTube channel is where I'm going to, really talk about a lot more, just because, I can make it as long as I want. And also I'll be taking, feedback from the comments. Hey, I want to see a video about this. Tell me more about this. It just, to me, the YouTube channel is where I can interact with readers of the book, go in more depth, and provide more context, clarity, and direction.
I think you should also add in there your loves of certain things that people don't know about, like your love of comic books, your love of Warhammer. I think just to get a different side of you.
It's funny that you say that. It's funny that you say that, because I actually was thinking something along those lines. I will do that I will do that because I'm, as I always jokingly say, like, I was a nerd before being a nerd was cool. Now, like, being a nerd is like, oh, cool. Oh, you're a Star Wars nerd. That's cool. I was that guy, a kid, when it was not cool.
You would have, I think back to it, guys like us would have ruled the schools back then.
Oh man. Like, yeah, if the times were changed. Yeah. Like, I mean, again, I remember being, picked on for comic books, or, any of the stuff that, now is like considered, okay to be into. I remember getting so much shit for it. So it's so funny, but yeah, I mean, I'm a movie, fanatic, and, like you said, comic books, Warhammer 40K. I mean, hell, I would, one day I'm going to, have kids, and I'm going to buy every fucking Lego set in the world, because I'm a Lego fanatic. I loved Legos when I was a kid, and I just need to have kids as an excuse to buy them again. But
you really don't.
I mean,
you can do it on your own.
I'm kidding. But the fact that there were no Star Wars Legos when I was a kid is a crime against humanity. Like, I would have went ballistic. So yeah, I'm going to go through every model when they come out. And my 40K, I'll take some videos. I probably have like a 10,000 point Space Wolves army. So shit, it might be more than 10,000 points, but it's huge.
Wow. Well, man, it was so awesome that you came on here. I can't tell people enough. This book is fucking amazing. It is, if you want a raw book and it just lays it all out there, this is the one for you. July 15th, it comes out. Make sure you get your pre-order on Amazon. We will have the link on my website too, so that people can click on there and go to buy the book on Amazon. But we want to get this in as many people's hands as possible. You guys did a fantastic job on it. Guys, you know where you can find Tyler. Let's talk about where you can find me. As always, you can find me on Instagram, the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast. And you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations are in video form, at the DTD podcast. Dynamic Tales Delivered. But your one-stop shop is going to be dtdpodcast.net. You can go there. You can see more pictures that we talked about. You can find the links to the book. You can find more out about the story. And you can also find audio and video in every version that we have of these episodes. Make sure you go check it out, dtdpodcast.net. Make sure you leave a comment. Tell me who you want to see on the show. Share, like, subscribe, be a friend, tell a friend, all those stupid things that people say. Do all of them. Make sure that you continue to do it and support the show. And talking about supporting the show, let's talk about the guys that make it happen. My buddy Hoot over at nomadicresearch.com. If you want cool shirts, hats, hoodies, backpacks, anything to make you look cool in the airport or just in general, that's where you're going to want to go. nomadicresearch.com. Make sure you go over there. And if you get a hold of me, send me a private message. I will let you know the code to get you a discount on some of your stuff. nomadicresearch.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. Make sure you go check out this book, Forged in Chaos. Pre-order it on Amazon. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. That's Tyler. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you on the next one.